Welcome to the Fortean Winds podcast, where we talk about UFOs and all the related high strangeness. I go by Bones, and with us, as always, is RamX.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Ram. So we have part two, really, where we're going to be talking about the Djinn. It's kind of a series because we talked about fairies in our previous episode, but they are related. But before we dive into the connections between the Djinn encounters and modern like UAP or NHI phenomena, we must clarify what we mean when we say Djinn. Much like fairies in the European tradition, Djinn are not just mythical creatures or fictional genies. In fact, their historical and folkloric presence is far deeper and more complex than the westernized image of a wish-granting trickster in a bottle, or what we call as a genie.
Right. I think when you say genie, people automatically think of Aladdin and like Disney, right?
Of course. Yep.
And the experienced folks in our audience might think of I Dream of Jeannie.
Ah, of course, yeah. The 1960s hit where a U.S. astronaut had, I guess, a good-looking redhead genie in a bottle. Waiting.
Was she a redhead or was she blonde? I don't know.
Maybe she was blonde, I don't know, but she
Barbara
was,
Eden.
She was desperately wanting to serve him his every whim. Which,
yes.
He was very cranky about it too.
Yes.
It's strange show.
Who wouldn't be upset to have a beautiful woman scantily dressed granting your every wish?
Right.
And that's a great way to point out the great Western misconception about genies, and that they're somehow something that comes out of a lamp and something that looks like a cloud with human features on it. And that,
right.
Of course, is not at all what genie actually are, or jinn, I should say. The word jinn and its historic origin actually translate closer to hidden or concealed. What does that remind you of?
Well, it sounds like the occult to me.
Yeah, exactly. Oculare, which comes from the Latin, and that's hidden or concealed. So the jinn, I would say, already have an overlap with what we're calling the occult. And the occult would also have an overlap with what we were calling fairies, right? It's an invisible world. There's a belief that there is a greater reality in an invisible world all around us, and that beings inhabit it. So these jinn and fairies and the kami from Japan, as well as the Ghana from India, and numerous others. We named many different fairy legends that are identical. We also can find Native American spiritual beliefs that are very similar, Native American creatures and cryptids that are very similar to European, that are similar to the jinn. So this is their invisible world too. And the jinn, much like fairies, were not like what folklore or our TV or cinematic representations of them are.
Right. So these beings are defined as hidden intelligences, not metaphorically, but literally. They live in a world that intersects ours. They are not demons in the Western Christian sense, although some are hostile. Like fairies, though, the jinn occupy a gray area, morally ambiguous, unpredictable, and phenomenally real to those who have encountered them. So they're kind of the master trickster.
So like in our last episode, we talked about how Robert Kirk and his Secret Commonwealth described fairies as subterranean and for the most part invisible. And that's pretty much true here. And he also called them betwixt man and angel. And he emphasized their liminal status, that they were between places, that they were in a state of change. They were neither fully material nor spiritual. We could also extend that to say that they were neither fully physical or not fully astral. And the Islamic texts tend to mirror a little bit what Kirk said. And in the Quran it says, "And the jinn we created before from scorching fire." In later traditions, this was clarified to mean smokeless fire, not smoke or visible flames, but something invisible and energetic, like heat or plasma, like the heat that would come off an asphalt on a hot day, just like we described so-called fairies. And this echoes UAP witness descriptions sometimes of glowing orbs, shimmering entities, and sudden temperature shifts before a cryptid encounter, things like that.
Right.
And in both traditions, these beings exist between worlds, and their presence often marks transition, like dusk, full moons, crossroads, abandoned places, haunted places, spiritual places. These are inhabitants of in-between spaces. So let's go back and talk about their origin. Where did the idea of the jinn first come from? So the concept of the jinn definitely predates Islam. We can use the Quran for reference, just like we can use the Bible for reference for spiritual beings, etc. But we know the idea of the jinn predates them. So a lot of scholars debate this, and there's a belief that there was a crossover between like Greco-Roman traditions and the same root ideas that gave birth to ideas of fairies, gave birth to ideas of jinn. But I just want to point out that wouldn't explain why the Kami look so similar, and why the Ghana looks so similar, and why the Native American myths look so similar. Right. It doesn't explain it, but that's a nice attempt. I think the most likely origin was in the Bedouin deserts with the Bedouin tribes, and that's who was traveling around. There's also some Mesopotamian and Assyrian roots that get mixed up in there. So there's even gods that appear to have been pre-Islamic gods, like Pazuzu was a desert god that some people believed in. That gets wrapped into being a jinn. Eblis or Iblis was the serpent in the garden that Adam and Eve interacted with. So he's considered a jinn in some traditions, in Islam. So we find some varying beliefs pre-Islam, and then as we get into Islam in the 7th century, there's still different beliefs about jinn, but there's some commonalities, just like we would have about angels and demons in Christianity. And in the Quran, they're said to be made from smokeless fire. Angels were made of light, demons were made of light, celestial beings were made of light, and then humans were made of clay.
So you say pre-Islamic, there's traces of jinn having their roots in ancient Mesopotamian.
Right.
The spirits of wind and wilderness. Like they're not gods or men, but they have interactions with humans that range from like inspiration to being possessed.
Right. So that inspiration thing is another good crossover with fairies as well as possession. And you're going to have to explain to me, like, what's the difference between a jinn possession and a demon possession? What's the difference between a fairy possession and a demon possession, right? There really isn't one that we can perceive, that I could perceive per se. Like, maybe if you could see the being, you might have a different perception, but we also know that these beings can look differently to different people. So I think that this is just a reframing of invisible beings, right? And it's a pantheon of invisible beings that a lot of traditions encounter, and then they frame them into different mythologies.
Right. You could say it's a very human experience, just timeless.
Totally.
So as Islam spread, these spirits were incorporated into their theology, but never fully tamed, because reports of jinn encounters across the Middle East bear just uncanny resemblance to Western reports of alien abduction, or even like poltergeist activity. Right.
Same flavor. Poltergeist activity. Where, how are you telling me this one's a fairy, this one's an angel, this one's a demon, this one's a jinn? Like, it's the same. If there's something knocking things over in your house, and then you assign something to it, right? Maybe a medium comes and says, this is what I see or think this is. But what people are interacting with is invisible beings and reframing it. So when we talk about jinn in this episode, we're going to be talking about a persistent regional expression of the same pattern. It's another non-human intelligence that's interacting with people across time, belief, culture, and perception. In Europe, they're fairies. In the Middle East, they're jinn. And in the 21st century, in ufology, they're UAP.
Right. So, of course, we have, multiple UAP witnesses that report encounters with glowing shape-shifting or plasma-like entities, right? And then
Right.
in many cases, they seem to be energy-based, shifting between form and the formlessness, or being formless. And this kind of matches the Djinn's classic description, or just
Yeah.
kind of the behavior of a trickster.
They're often described as visible or invisible alternately. And the shapeshifter aspects, there's some that are reported as being anthropomorphic. There are some that, they look like half man, half animal.
Mm-hmm.
Or they have animal-like features, maybe, the sharp teeth, like we talked about Indrid Cold and the incident in Point Pleasant in the Mothman case that was very fairy-like. It could also be considered very jinn-like. These are just different words for the same
Right.
experiences. It's a type of encounter. I would like to suggest here to the entire paranormal UAP field that we start to look at these as types of encounters. And that's how they're calling them things invisible or visible. This one's a poltergeist. This one's a demon. This one's an angel. This one's a jinn. It's because of the type of encounter. It's the type of experience. We're the one that's calling it that. We're
Right.
the one that's framing it. But we're encountering the same type of energy. On our website, we have an article called Condign Revisited, and it talks about plasma type UAP, which they stop short of saying sentient in the article, but they just barely stop short of it. And we know from Hesselden in Norway that the UAP studies that are going down there, that these are very similar reports. So plasma UAPs are one type of UAP. We're sure about that.
Yeah.
And hey, interestingly enough, and we'll get there with this, but one thing that is said to disrupt jinn is iron. And this was also said to disrupt fairies. Completely different, right? Places on the globe, in different, so-called invisible entities are said to be disrupted in the same way, iron. And that's a remarkably magnetic substance. So plasma is heavily affected by iron.
Right, right. Yeah, I think the power is in them. Well, the power that they hold is that they can influence thought and matter without actually having a real physical form.
That's right. And they make a big deal out of that. Like a lot of pre-Islamic and then Islamic thought was that jinn would inspire poetry. And this is the same thing with the fae and the fairies. Same ideas. It goes back to Greek and Rome and the daemons and the angelus, right? We discussed last time.
Right.
That in Greece and Rome, the daemon were considered to be free spirits, if you will, and not tied to another entity. And the angelus were considered to be like messengers or emissaries of another entity. And that's similar to the jinn in some ways because, especially as Islam gets involved, jinn are thought to be demons when they don't practice Islam. So jinn have religion. This was different than Kirk's work on the fairies. In Kirk's work on the fairies, he thought that they didn't have religion per se, like God, that they had something else, which doesn't necessarily match in all encounters. There's some beings and some reliable encounters where these beings seem to believe in some sort of religion. So in Islam, jinn can become demons when they don't practice Islam. But there can be good and Islamic jinn that practice Islam and worship Allah.
Right.
So that's a big difference there. But that smokeless fire describes an energetic medium. It's not material or purely spiritual. And the forms they choose are often disturbing and uncanny or unusual or highly anomalous. They mismatch known elements. They're deliberately ambiguous. And that's the pattern.
one of the really interesting points that Robert Kirk made when he was talking about fairies was the fact that they weren't really physically visible unless you had the second sight. That was always a really interesting thing. And then kind of similar in the jinn, where they it's common to call jinn as naturally invisible. So it's kind of the same concept.
Yeah, unless they choose to reveal themselves, or unless you're attuned to them via dreams or ritual or trauma or spiritual sensitivity. So that's kind of the same. That's pretty much same as fairies.
Yeah. So in our research, we learned that the jinn often appear to those undergoing spiritual distress, or practicing, we'll say, esoteric arts. And then they have these visual hallucinations, but it's kind of like a poltergeist-like phenomenon that they also experience, or sleep paralysis. That always comes up, right?
Yeah, dreams, weird, strange out-of-body experiences, right? But then they report physical marks like scratches or bruises, like the way some people would report in demon possession. So that sounds really familiar.
Yeah.
And in modern UAP encounters, we find something very similar with the hitchhiker effect. And like even Kenneth Arnold, the guy who supposedly kicked off the modern wave of ufology, the case that made the news that kicked it all off.
Right.
What's not normally reported about that is that Kenneth Arnold went home and had the hitchhiker effect type experiences. He had poltergeist-like experiences in his house. Why would a encounter with an alien spacecraft leave you with having experiences that resemble something that the jinn were like,
Right.
And it feels like the entity chooses the witness, not the other way around. We think there's some type of co-creation or co-decision that happens there that involves a number of factors. We've talked a lot about it and did our best to unpack it. But a big part of this is the entity choosing the person and then choosing the type of encounter or experience. And the person's psychological makeup, if it follows the pattern that we found, has a lot to do with that.
So we talk about trickster behavior, right? And the jinn and the fairies, they definitely exhibit the same trickster behavior. And, trickster behavior is kind of a universal thing. It's in legends all over the world and in so many different cultures. And they're there as a teacher sometimes. But they do, make things confusing too. They have riddles or contradictory messages, or they punish those who uncover their true nature. And it's basically a way. The tricksters are always kind of walking a fine line of right and wrong, right?
Mm. Yes.
Sometimes it's a story of morality or taboo.
Right. And it's a way to teach you morality, because as we've talked about, everyone's ideas of good or evil are different, even if you're in the same pew. Don't be surprised. Talk to your neighbor. And these jinn have that type of moral ambiguity about them. They can practice religion. And much like fairies or UAP encounters, sometimes they're seen as pivotal. They sometimes plant ideas, that seed ideas, that then go on to become something else. And they can appear in sometimes misleading forms, like, they can look like an angel but have bad ideas, and vice versa. Sometimes they look like, they have horns and hooves, and yet they're giving you good advice. It's very strange. But they can offer riddles and contradictory messages, and this ends up getting to be what people also considered fairy. So this is what I mean when I say the categories are defined by the experience. I'm interacting with something that's normally invisible. This is how it looks during the experience, and this is what the experience was. And then people come away from it and they go, that was an angel, that was a demon, that was a jinn, that was a fairy, based on those factors. But the underlying principles are always the same. Someone encountered something invisible and it changed them, and it potentially changed them physically. That there are cases where we find that. And the same thing with UAP. Yeah. Yeah, and Louis Farrakhan described a UFO experience that was really pivotal to him, and he was in the Nation of Islam, and he interpreted it very differently. Like, he didn't interpret it as aliens.
Yeah, I mean, he had a very personal experience. He kind of, from what I read, he saw his predecessor, right?
Right. He encountered what he called the mother wheel or mother plane.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
This was in 1985 in Mexico, and he claimed that after a hike, he was beamed up by Ray. And inside the craft, he claims to have heard the voice of Elijah Muhammad, who had died in 1975.
Right.
And he said that Muhammad warned him of a war that was being planned in the U.S., but he didn't consider this an encounter with aliens. He thought that this was an advanced technological craft being piloted by black scientists. That's consistent with his beliefs in Nation of Islam.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, he just, like I said, it was a very personal experience, like that fit within his own life's narrative.
Yeah. And that's how UAP encounters, fairy encounters, whatever encounters end up happening. Like, the anomalous experience underneath it is similar. You encountered something that was an odd energy. You had something that was either physical or not physical in an experience, and it was pivotal. Like, it changed you. And I think that comes up a lot in the stories of the jinn, as well as the fairies.
Right.
And this is how NHI interact with us in one way, right? There's physical interactions, and then there's some ways where they seem to be getting involved in our ideas, our dogma, our beliefs.
Right. And like you said, in previous episode, those who have the so-called second sight that Kirk mentioned with the fairies is that, we have mediums that claim contact with different intelligence, and it's not always pleasant, or it's usually unpleasant.
Just like UAP encounters, where we find that more people report negative encounters than do report positive encounters. Right. But as we've pointed out before, like, what motive do you have to point out a positive encounter? There's not much motivation there. Your people are just going to treat you like you're crazy, and they're never going to believe you. Like, the mass public is never going to believe you.
Right.
But lots of other similarities between jinn and fairies, and they were said to have lived in abandoned spaces, just like haunted spaces, but they would say they're haunted by jinn. Wells, caves, old ruins. You can see a lot of YouTube videos. There was a very popular trend in Arabic countries a while back of putting up jinn-like videos that were thought to be real, but were clearly not. And
right.
It was kind of fun in a way. It seemed like everyone was in on it, where they were like trying to create sort of grassroots horror movement.
Right.
I don't know. But I have seen some videos from the Middle East that were very strange, and a lot of soldiers who were over there during the wars reported very strange things. I heard things while I was in that people reported, and you take a lot of it with a grain of salt, but there's just a lot of reports from that region about strange and anomalous things. There's a great YouTube channel I'll link to called Mysterious Middle East. They're very Fortean in their approach, and they do some beautiful documentaries about Middle Eastern and jinn legends.
So in Fortean terms, we're dealing with cultural overlays on a persistent phenomenon.
Right.
Like we say this all the time, it's a pattern. It's not random, and it's definitely intelligent. But you see occasionally the phenomenon is hostile. It almost always triggers an emotional response, and it can be adaptive too in a way. But like you always say, Ram, if they really wanted to fully disclose themselves to the world, they would, but they decide to present themselves in this way for a reason.
Right. Always ambiguous, always changing shape. And that's a big part of the jinn myths and legends and folklore. And yes, they induce an emotional response, but they also seem to respond to emotion. And this is consistent, right? And it comes out in possession, cases of jinn possession, which is quite common and, or at least commonly diagnosed by imams in the Middle East. This was interesting. And so, but the process to get the jinn out is very similar to the same process to get a demon out. So it becomes the experience of the individual that defines what we're calling the entity. And I think that that's, if there's one point that the jinn really drive home with us today, I think that that should be it, is that this is a type of an encounter. And then we frame it with a name. And jinn encompasses so much, like the shapeshifter, the invisible, just like fairies, it encompasses so much that it ends up really becoming us talking about the same space, this liminal space.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a pretty good wrap up of this topic. I mean, you know, like all the topics that we talk about here, they could be so many episodes really to really go into depth with them. But I think we touched on a lot of good points there. So now we want to kind of wrap up this episode, and we kind of want to talk about Fortean Winds, the podcast.
Yeah. Fortean Winds, the podcast.
Yeah, and mention our first sponsor too, right?
Yeah, we've been growing a lot lately, and we've got a lot of new folks listening to us, and we just want to say thank you. And we also want to mention that we appreciate all of your comments, suggestions, feedback, whether it's positive or negative. It really helps us out. I think one note that I'm trying to address that someone gave us was that I say the word interesting too much. So if you haven't noticed, I've been working on that. I'm just using compelling, fascinating, lots of different ones. But I use the word interesting as kind of a thinking word to, or also a way to say things that I'm suspicious of, but I don't want to tell you that I'm suspicious of it. I hope you guys are picking up on that I'm like, that's interesting. I would pay attention to that and see where it goes. It's just that it's not solid enough, right? And Bones and I were talking about the next couple episodes. So I think what we'll do for the next one is I've been sitting on some stuff from Corruption Land. I took a lot of the research we started with our NAR episodes and the New Apostle episodes and kept going over this time. And I think I've mapped out how a specific type of kingdom dominionist group got into power. Prosperity gospel folks got into power. And I think I've mapped out some of the info weapons that they've used to do it. So that's going to be kind of an interesting episode. And I think it fits, again, even historically. Like when we do these episodes that are current events, we've been doing more of them, and it seems like people really like it. So I think we'll do more. But when we do these episodes, I think it's good for us to stay topical so that they have some sort of long-term value, you know?
Right.
And speaking of long-term value, we have our first sponsor, which is kind of fun, and it is Blissani. It is a vegan skincare company, and full disclosure, I am involved in the company, and these people love me, so they're willing to do this. No one else right now is offering to sponsor Fortean Winds. But hey, we are open to it. If the products are good, they kind of fit with our whole mission ideas, then I think we're open to doing it, and we'd like you to give our audience a good deal. So this company, Blissani, is made in the USA. All of the ingredients are vegan. Yours truly even had a hand in researching some and putting those into the product. So I've also been using it for years, and it makes me look almost wrinkle-free. I don't know, maybe. But I feel much better about using skincare that's vegan and doesn't have any long-term harm associated with it and things like that. Something a doctor told me once was what you put on your skin ends up hitting your liver. So big on the vegan stuff, and the products that are most popular at Blissani are anti-acne and anti-aging. So they're both vegan, and I feel better about giving them to the young people in my life. And they are offering 25% off to our Fortean Winds customers for the holidays.
So is there a coupon code that they can use?
Yeah, they can use Fortean25 to get 25% off their first order at Blissani. And we'll see if they'll give us an ongoing discount. Let's see how it goes. But because these people are close to us, Fortean Winds gets a portion of every order. And I think, you know, what I'd like to do in the future is do more products that we would actually use and do use. There's this magnifying glass that I have that I love, that I found a supplier for. And I thought, what could be more Fortean Winds than a very cool magnifying glass? And I've used it on like anomalous stuff and then investigations. And I've also used it all around the house because it has both an LED light and an ultraviolet light. I think it's fantastic. So that is something I was thinking about us doing, because I don't really want to break the show up with a bunch of commercials, you know, or ads. And I'd love to do these sponsorship stuff at the end of the show and just have this kind of be a wrap up. We talk about our sponsors, we tell them about the deal, and then we talk about like what the next episodes are going to be.
Right. And then maybe we'll do some fun audio stuff. You know, I got some ideas we can put. I think they're sometimes called audio collages. You know, we can have clips of our favorite speakers and some mixed up with music or just goofy sounds. You know,
that would be awesome. Like a Tim and Eric Fortean Winds episode. Right. We've been talking about that for a long time. It'd be really fun. And we have some great outtakes we could use for that. That would be really cool.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I'm excited about doing the sponsors too, because I think we've had a support the show sort of thing up there for a while that no one's ever really used. And I don't want anyone to feel like they have to. I also don't want you to feel like you have to buy whatever it is that we're pitching at the end of the show. This is my disclaimer going forward. Hopefully we can just make enough to break even on the show and just be able to do the show for free. That would be great. And that would allow us a path to be sustainable long term, and it would prevent us from having to put a subscription on it, because I really don't want to do that. Especially the episodes that we did earlier, I think are really the answers many people were looking for. Like, you know, we answered the question of, okay, what would happen if a couple of somewhat regular guys just went and did something like scholarly research on all of this stuff? Like, what would they end up coming up with? And, you know, we end up in the same place as Keel and Valet, and we chronicled the journey. Those things I just don't want to put behind a paywall, you know, going forward. And I think if we can just make a little bit on the sponsorship, that'll do it. We also get guest proposals now, which is interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Did you even know that was how it worked?
Yeah.
I did not know that. I feel really naive and kind of silly for not knowing that.
Yeah, you just get contacted by someone, like some PR person that.
Yeah, publicists or agents or managers will reach out and be like, would you consider this person? And I'm a little confused by some of the guest proposals that we get sometimes. I'm like, you obviously didn't listen to the show, because this would be about a 5-minute show, because we would tear your guy a new butthole. But we get, you know, it is an odd mix, but I'm totally open to it. I think we're both open to having guests, but they have to sort of at least fit into what we're talking about. You don't have to agree with us. In fact, you could completely disagree with us. Just be interesting and on topic.
Right.
But I think we've got our next couple shows figured out, and then by then we still have a bunch of anomalous stuff that we haven't discussed. Like, I still want to do the Dogman episode. And Greg Caldwell from THC said he'd come on and do the Dogman episode with us. I thought that was a fun one. Like, yeah, that'd be a fun one to do. That's what I wanted to, like, people from around the field to come and do a topic with us. I think that would, but it's tough because they all want to push whatever their publicist is saying, you know. So.
Right.
But those are the type of guest episodes I hope to do next year. So.
Right on. All right, well, it sounds good, Ram. Everyone, thanks for listening, as always. We really appreciate you. Make sure to visit our website when you can at forteanwinds.com.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. I appreciate the listening and hope you're enjoying the holidays.
Take care.